if I can't be of service, then I'm worthless. That line really stood out to me as, yes, this is how high achievers feel, where they feel like if I don't do everything for everyone, then who am I?
Mm-hmm.
That's the core of who I am.
What does it always cost to be the strong one? On this episode of Said Out Loud, Dr. Madiha Tassin, research director of the FYI, and Sara Sultan explore the hidden weight behind high functioning anxiety in women and how it shapes our relationships, our boundaries, and our connection with Allah. Naming what's been carried quietly and opening the door to a more honest, grounded way of being.
So yeah, let's talk about this silent weight that so many women are carrying. What does it look like in terms of what you're seeing, both sort of professionally, but also anecdotally, with women kind of balancing it all, but silently? What does it look like? What are you seeing?
I think you're right, balancing it all and then silently struggling comes to a lot of Muslim women in our community. There's a role that they take on, as you introduced, where it's they kind of become everything for everyone, and then they start to lose little bits of themselves along the way. And so the term in that we often use just in therapy is high functioning anxiety, and we tend to see that in overachievers, and then that
Mm-hmm.
leads to burnout. And so what that means is that people who have these high levels of anxiety, but those levels of anxiety, it doesn't cause them to freeze. Instead, it pushes them forward to continue to meet everybody's expectations. And so they use their anxiety and stress to actually propel themselves forward. So in day-to-day life, they're functioning really well. But the problem comes when they need to slow down, when they need to be able to give themselves time to rest. And so they might seem like they have everything, like they're very put together, like they're calm on the outside, but
Mm-hmm.
internally, they're constantly worrying. They might be doubting themselves. They feel like they have to constantly be doing something, go, go, go all the time. And they end up wearing a mask. They end up wearing a mask that they feel like they can't fully let down in front of anybody. And it can feel really lonely and isolating. And then they further feel like they have to carry it all because they can't let down that mask.
Do you? This might be a bit silly. Have you seen the movie or heard of the movie Encanto?
Oh my gosh, let me just tell you, when I
Okay.
was preparing for this, Encanto and the second Inside Out movie,
Mm-hmm.
those were the two where I was like, these are the perfect descriptions
Yes.
for this topic. So you're thinking about the eldest sister, right?
Yes, yeah. And
Yes.
also actually I was also thinking about the middle one, the I forgot her name now, but when she does that pressure song,
Oh, that's who I
is she
thought
the
we
middle?
were talking about. I thought she was the eldest sister.
Okay, maybe I got it
Yeah,
wrong. That
yeah,
tells you how long ago I watched it. But yes, exactly. That pressure song is exactly what I was thinking about as you were describing.
yeah,
Like on the outside she looks fine and then she finally lets it out a little bit and that's when all the cracks start to show and the pressure that she's
yeah.
feeling that's building up inside.
Actually, yeah. Like I remember when I watched that the first time, I actually got teary-eyed
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
listened to the song because I was like, that is the perfect description. Because she says something along the lines of, if I can't be of service, then I'm worthless or something like that. And I
Mhm.
think that that line really stood out to me as, yes, this is how high achievers feel, where they feel like if I don't do everything for everyone, then who am I?
Mhm.
That's the core of who I am.
Right.
And that's where the struggle is, right? So I think yeah, that I think that was a perfect portrayal of it.
Yeah, yeah. So can you dig into that a little bit? Like as you were describing what they're kind of going through inside, but also why do women that feel what makes them have to feel like that? Where does that pressure come from of or sort of that evaluation of like this is who I have um to be of service? And why is that important to their self-concept that's making them kind of feel like they need to keep this going?
So at the core of any type of anxiety is a fear. And in this situation, like whenever somebody is very high functioning, high achieving, but that anxiety is eating away at them inside, the question to ask is, what is the fear that's there? Like,
Mhm.
what are you? And typically, when there's a fear, we're trying to avoid something, and a lot of times you can group this into four different categories. So one of them would be the fear of failure, fear of like making a mistake, falling short. The second is the fear of uncertainty, the fear of the unknown. Like, what if I don't do this and this happens? Or what if I say this to this person and this happens? So, this fear of the unknown and uncertainty of what might happen. The third is a fear of judgment or criticism. And that's where a lot of times that people pleasing tendency comes in. And a lot
Mm,
of overachievers really tend to struggle with that. And then there's the fear of unworthiness or not being enough. And that's the one that we were just talking about in Canto, where
mhm,
it's this idea if I don't do all of these things, then that's my value. And then what am I? Like I'm not worth much if these are not the things that I'm constantly doing. And these fears can be really hard to detect because in our society in general, in Western society, but then also in Muslim communities, Muslim families, we tend to reward this overachieving mentality.
mhm,
And so, like a woman who's drowning really quietly, she might be called impressive, she might be called committed, she might be inspiring, but nobody sees that her nervous system is just like out of whack as
mhm.
she's trying to juggle all of this.
But when you're talking about these different fears, and part of it is like us recognizing that we have these fears, what are you seeing in terms of where these fears come from? What are some causes?
You know, for everybody, it can be slightly different, but I would say some of the themes are definitely when you look into past experiences, when you look into a person's childhood, when you look into kind of like the model of their family, that's one of the themes that you might see. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people are recognized, not just women, but people are recognized for their achievements. And
Mhm,
that's normal. That's normal socially, right? That's normal
right.
socially that when you get 100 on a test, when you get inducted into the honor society, when you get a great job, when you get married, all of these things are viewed as achievements and those are the things that are celebrated. Other things are not celebrated as much, and so when people tend to register what's celebrated and they attach value to that because other people have attached value to it. So when a woman has grown up with, oh, you're just so helpful, you're always stepping in to
Mm,
do everything for everyone, you're the dependable one, you're always calm, in a crisis, you're always willing to step in, you always do everything. Those things tend to be praised, and I want to be clear that I think in the Western mentality, this has been really undermined in terms of like you don't need to show up, right?
mhm,
No, we do need to show up, right? We do need to show up, but we need to have a limit to how much we show up. And
mm,
that's where a lot of times we don't know what the limit is. And so there is value in showing up, but that is not your sole value. But
mhm,
a lot of times there's that identity attachment to my value is attached to this because this is what I have learned is valuable.
mhm.
There's a hidden cost to it too.
Okay, so you're saying girls who are growing up in families where what they're getting praised for is kind of what then they're using to build that identity of specifically, at least for the fear of like people pleasing, of like I need to do this to make people happy, because that's what they saw in their families. This is
Yeah.
what girls got praised for. This is what daughters got praised for,
Yeah.
versus what boys might get praised for and sons. Or in other, some families, maybe that's not what girls got praised for, but
Mhm.
they got praised for other reasons. So one thing we have to think about is what did we grow up with in our childhood, in our homes? Even as simple as just our relationships, right? It's not always that there's some heavy trauma that causes some of these things. It's also just how you were brought up, and what was recognized and praised in your home.
And I think the other part of it too is not just what you were praised for, but what you were criticized for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other part of this is that for a lot of high achieving women, there's a lot of self criticism. There's a
Mm-hmm.
very, very harsh inner critic. And so when you are not doing something, when you're resting, that inner critic flares up and is like, isn't there something else you're supposed to be doing? Isn't there a more valuable use of your
Mm-hmm.
time?
Oh, I
Isn't there, like this person needs this from you and you're just sitting there having a cup of tea or whatever it is, right?
right.
That or you're taking a rest and you're letting your body rest and you're going to sleep early, but really there's a load of laundry that needs to be
Mm-hmm.
folded. So this inner critic comes out. So it's not just because universally there are certain things that are valued
Mm-hmm.
by people. So it's okay to praise our children or like to encourage our children when we see that they're doing things that are praiseworthy, especially when we see them doing things that are praiseworthy from an Islamic lens. Although doing it carefully and making sure that it's like, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just like, you just racked up some good deeds with Allah for doing that instead of
Right.
the praise being tied to just people.
Right.
But the other thing is what are we being criticized for? What have we been criticized for when we were
Mhm.
young? So if whenever like, your mom walked into the living room and you were like watching TV, you immediately turn off the TV and you get up and you're just like, I got to
And
be
do
doing something
something. Yeah.
productive, otherwise I'm going to
Yeah.
get yelled at. That a lot of times yields this feeling of like, I am loved when I am productive. I am
Hmm.
loved when I am bringing value to somebody else's life.
Right.
And so then that can become tied to identity.
I love the point that you made about like your inner critic. Our inner voices come from, especially when we're younger, they're getting built by others and what we hear and feel from around us. So as an adult, I think also what you're saying is like, I have this inner voice as a woman now, but it came from somewhere and it came from others' experiences. And it's about paying attention to that.
Yeah, and
Okay.
figuring out, does that voice still serve me? Because
Right.
that voice developed when we needed it and it served us at a certain point in our life.
Hmm.
It's not the bad guy, right? Like a lot of times we think of anxiety, we think of depression, we think of criticism, we think of like these different voices in us as the bad guy, and we're just like, we just want to get rid of them. But they're not. They all serve a function. It's just, is that function still being fulfilled now? Is it still serving us now? And then just re-examining it a little bit.
Right, right. Can you talk a little bit about the other two fears that we didn't really touch on and where they might come from, um, in terms of how they might develop in some women?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about like that fear of judgment, criticism,
Hmm.
about the fear of not being enough, like tying our value to how much we're able to offer. Then there's the fear of failure or mistakes. I think that ties in also there where there is a component of, if I can't be perfect,
Hmm.
then it's not worth it, right? Like it's perfection is the status that we strive to achieve. And if you can't reach perfection, like then there's no point. And
Hmm.
so the problem with that is then we're setting a standard for ourselves that's based on impossibilities. And when you set an impossible standard, you can never achieve it and you stop striving for what actually is possible. And so this is actually something that research has shown about. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's a really interesting research study where they had a group of kids and they had them divided into two groups. In one group, when they took a test, that group was praised on like, wow, you are so smart,
Hmm.
like, you're like, or that they were really highly encouraged for being smart. The other one was like, wow, you worked really hard on that.
Your effort, right,
Yeah, effort.
right.
And then when they gave them the opportunity to do something more challenging, the ones who were labeled as smart didn't want to,
Hmm.
because they were afraid of that a mistake, a failure would result in them no longer being labeled in that way.
Right.
But the ones who were praised for effort, they were like, yeah, I'm a hard worker. I am going to strive and I'm going to try for this challenge because that's not going to shake my identity if I fail because I'm still working hard, right?
Right.
And so when we tie our identity to the end product, and
Hmm.
this is where like Islam and our identity as Muslims is so healing, right? Because
Hmm.
He doesn't reward us for the end product. He
Right.
rewards us for our effort,
Effort,
right?
right.
And so yeah, and so like that helps to really as an antidote to that. And then the fear of uncertainty and the unknown, that can develop in a lot of ways, especially from, like, I think in general, most people have this to a degree.
Hmm.
I mean, who doesn't, right?
Right.
Like we as human beings want predictability. We check our GPS. Even like every day I'm going to pick up my kids from school and I check the GPS to see if there's an accident on the road just because I
Right.
don't want to get stuck in
Right.
traffic.
Right.
We prefer predictability. That's just the way our brains work.
Hmm.
But especially people who have a trauma, especially a sudden trauma,
Hmm.
they've been through, uncertainty and the unknown is really attached to a very strong anxiety response because
Hmm.
there was a time in their life where uncertainty just flipped their world upside down, right? And so for to a certain extent we all have this struggle with a certain degree of uncertainty, but for some people based on their history it can be worse. Yeah.
It gets excessive. Yeah. So can you describe what a woman who is high functioning looks like, that has is working from that fear?
The fear of uncertainty.
Yes, yeah, so that we can kind of recognize it in ourselves and think about, okay, where am I at with some of these different
So
fears?
this would be a woman who, on the outside, very, very put together. Like
Mhm.
she's on top of things. She's very timely. She's very punctual. She is very, very dependable. So people know if I want, like, have you ever seen those challenges on Instagram where someone's like, you'll get like, if you could get $100,000 if you picked up the phone and somebody did pick up, like
Mhm.
this is the woman you'd call,
Who would you
right?
call? Right.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
and like, so oh yeah, so this is a woman you'd call. This is also somebody who every time her child gets a cold, she'll take them to the doctor
Mhm.
because she's worried, like, I don't know what this could be. Like it could be so many possible things, right? That her life is organized in very, very strategic ways to avoid any possible outside forces from
Mhm.
impacting, from a sudden change, right? So that's where, that's kind of a brief description. I don't know if you have anything to add to that as you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I think it's what you're saying is like what some who it's someone who on the outside looks like they're super organized and they've got everything penciled in, even like hanging out with friends is also penciled in, and it looks great, but then it makes you wonder, like, there's something going on that's making you pencil even a social gathering with a friend, right? Versus the spontaneous, hey, let's meet up for coffee. But that's interesting. It's like what looks like on the outside is organization. When it's extreme at some point, it could be driven by this like fear of things
Yeah, and
not going to plan and what that's going to do to you.
yeah, exactly. And
Mhm.
I'll say that, you might, if you're penciling in the social gathering because you're afraid you'll forget otherwise, like
Right,
that's
of
fine,
course.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, of
do
course.
it,
Yeah,
do what you have to do and use
yeah,
your calendar to whatever as a
right.
tool. But if this is, it's more about what this fear is preventing you from. What are you
Sure.
avoiding, right? Are you avoiding this impromptu gathering with like somebody spontaneously invites you and you're just like, no, 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 I didn't plan for this. I didn't plan for this, so I can't do
Mm,
it.
okay.
And because if I do something unplanned, what if? It's the what ifs. It's like somebody
Mhm.
who is constantly underneath the surface thinking. So I would say to label this, if you want a label, is the person who overthinks. Like
Right.
somebody who is constantly like, so the reason they're organized is because if this shifts, then I have to figure out all the dominoes that can fall.
Mm,
Because what if the final 100th domino falls? And that's what I'm afraid is going to happen.
right.
So it's this constant planning of like, you know, well, what if she didn't reply to my text message because she's upset because I phrased it weird? Oh, maybe instead of a period, I should have put an exclamation point. Did I use the
Mm,
wrong emoji? What if, what if, what if? That's the fear of uncertainty is I don't know what this person's thinking. I don't know what's going to happen. So I would say you also really see it in terms of the racing thoughts.
mm.
Yeah.
But and then and the issue is when that what if about something that's down, that's a potential either future or you don't know if it's going to happen, is then impacting your ability to do something now
Yeah.
and holding you
Exactly.
back from something now, is when it becomes
Exactly.
problematic.
Yeah, and the emotional and mental toll that it takes to think constantly.
Right.
It's exhausting. It's
Right.
exhausting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about, like, we went into like childhood experiences and how that's sort of one of the causes, not causes, but kind of like contributes to why we have these tendencies tied to our identity and the fears where they come from. Along the same lines, can you talk a little about how culture, um, I kind of throw it all at you, but I'll do it one at a time. But like culture, religion, even, or misinterpretation of religion, how are these different systems in our lives also playing a role and why this might be happening to a lot of women? And I'm asking that also because it feels like this issue is just so much more prominent now. I don't know if that's true, like statistically, but it just feels like we're seeing a lot more women kind of going through with it and struggling versus just going through it and nobody knows.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you mentioned like, why is this so prevalent right now?
Mm,
And as you were asking that, I thought to myself, why is it? Like, I'm sure that self-sacrifice has been
Right,
something that
exactly.
has
Yeah.
been a part of our society, our also like our Muslim community for a really long time. But why is it now that it's gotten so to like this extent? And I think where people are burning out and where people are, are having like this level of anxiety, I think that there's the perfect storm right now, because a lot of what we see, I can't really speak too much to women living in other places other than the West, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where I live, that's where my clients live, and so that's my bubble of more experience, right? But I think that we live in the perfect storm because we have double the societal expectations now, right? Like we have the
Mm-hmm.
Western societal expectations and we have like what is more quote unquote traditional societal expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to juggle both and it's impossible.
Right.
Possible,
Yep.
right? Like this idea, there's this fallacy of balance. You can't, when you have all of these roles, especially if you are working and you are
Mm-hmm.
a wife and you are a mother and you are a daughter and you are a sister and you're a friend and you have all of these different roles. And realistically, when we live in systems, social systems, familial systems, people do need things from us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way society has always traditionally functioned. And there's nothing wrong with people needing things
Right.
from us because
Right.
then that allows us to need things from people.
Mm-hmm.
But what has happened is now within the Western framework, we have gained this idea of hyper independence, where
Mm.
now there's the expectation that we are still giving everybody what they need, but we are not allowed to
Not
need.
taking anything in return.
Yes,
Right.
that's impossible. And then
Right.
also, like, that is impossible, but on top of it, our roles have increased exponentially because now there's also educationally how far we're pursuing, which is beautiful.
Right.
That's something
Right.
that
Agreed.
is, and
Yeah.
that activates a different part of ourselves, right? Educationally, career-wise, like all of these different things that we are pursuing, where our involvement in the community, all of these different things are amazing, and women are like the pillars that hold our communities together.
The hyper independence is a part of it. Also, it's like saying sort of that the village has gone away. We always say it takes a village to raise a child, but in general, the village of support, whether you're a mother, whether you're not a mother, like just that village of support in our context here has disappeared or gotten much less.
And it's a conversation I see happening a lot, like, in like also social media spaces and things like that. And what I've been hearing a lot lately is if you want a village, that requires you to be a villager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that you have to give of yourself. But what nobody really talks about in it is it also requires you to be like, being a villager means that you can also lean on your village and request that. And then you show up for your friends, you show up for people as well, but are you able to express your need, or do you expect people to show up without knowing what you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a big part of this particular struggle that comes with overachieving, high functioning anxiety is, do we even know what we need? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not even like, oh, that you have to ask for it, but like, how do you get to the point of being able to understand what you're needing at
Right.
that point? What
Right.
is okay to let go of, right? And that's where I think a lot of boundaries is a big issue where I think
Yeah.
comes into play. And that's one of the things in our community where that there's not a lot of education around that, or the education there are a lot of misconceptions around the
Mm-hmm.
education around that.
Right, right. Part of not asking is that you don't even know if you have the need to ask. Is another part of it also what's holding you back from asking?
I think Islam provides a beautiful reframe for that too, where we don't need to be everything for everyone, but also it is okay to ask for help. It's something that's actually encouraged, right? Because
Mhm.
if you think about, like, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that the most beloved to Allah is the one who's most beneficial to people, right? So a high achiever is going to take this as going to be like,
Gotta
I'm
be
going
on
to be
top
most
level.
beneficial.
Yeah.
I'm going to give, I'm going to give, I'm going to
Right.
give. There's also another way to look at it, which is,
Mhm.
why are you depriving others from having that reward? Why are you depriving others from
Mm.
being from amongst those who are so beloved to Allah? It can
Reframe.
be beneficial to you. That could be a path to Jannah for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so if you look at it from that, again, that is still thinking about others and doing something for others, but sometimes that's what people need.
Right.
It's the same way as like some moms won't take care of themselves health wise until they think about, I want to be able to do this for my kids. I want to be able to, have a long, healthy life for the sake of my kids. Sometimes that reframe is needed to get over that first hump of being able to
Mhm.
ask for that help.
I really love that reframe. I didn't think of it that way of like you're it's giving others the chance to also earn that baraka of serving. It's really
And the Prophet
awesome.
ﷺ says, love for your brother or sister what you love for yourself, right?
Right.
So
Right.
if you
Yeah.
if you want to be rewarded for being of service to others, then why wouldn't you want somebody else to have that reward?
So let me ask you this. We've been talking so far a lot about sort of what's happening internally, right? Inside sort of women, whether it's your, stuff that happened to you in your childhood, or anxieties and fears that you have. Are some of us also kind of continuing in this high functioning role, regardless of what it's doing to us, because of the pressures and expectations we get from others, though, as well, right?
Absolutely. I think that that's a huge part of it as well, because like we said before, we fall into this trap because this is the trap we're praised for falling into, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I love that you
yeah.
said
And
it
then
that way.
yeah, and then I think also the struggle is once you realize that I might have been able to do everything for everyone up to a certain point, but I am no longer able to do that. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is not serving me in for myself, but then also in my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the struggle is, but now I've established this as a dynamic between me and people are not going to be happy when I shift this
Exactly.
dynamic. Yes.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes. And that's where boundaries come into place. I know you wanted to talk about it like, at
Yeah,
a later
we
point,
can
but
get
let's
into
talk
it.
about,
Yep.
yeah. So that's
No,
where,
for it.
you know, that when you're used to holding everything together, now these boundaries are tied to the guilt of wanting to change them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And boundaries don't feel normal. Okay, so first, before I keep using the word boundaries,
I
but
think probably, yeah, let's
yeah,
explain it.
let
Yeah.
me define it because
Yes.
I think when we look at when we hear the word boundaries, we think of somebody being like, so I'm not going to allow you to speak to me that way, and like
Exactly.
a very
Yes.
kind of like,
Exactly. Right.
yeah, like a very
It's other
aggressive.
focused, right. And
Yes,
it's other focused. It's aggressive, but it's also kind of other focused. And
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
so
Next
yeah, go
answer.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's that is a very counter, like that's not a balanced approach to boundaries. And I think that when you are trying to set a boundary, you're trying to request respect from someone to a certain extent. You have to do it respectfully. You
Right.
can't
Of course.
request respect from someone disrespectfully, right?
Right.
So the way I define boundaries, it's boundaries are your values being put into action. It is a way of making space for what's important to you and conveying those priorities to
Hmm.
and values to someone else, right? So, for example, when you make time to pray, you are creating a boundary around time and you are conveying to yourself, but especially to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you value this obligation, that this
Hmm.
is something that's valuable to you. That's a boundary.
Right.
Nobody thinks about it in terms of that word, but that is exactly what a boundary is. And so, what a boundary does is it offers protection for yourself, for others,
Hmm.
and for the relationships. Whether you're protecting your relationship with Allah, whether you're protecting your relationship with your parents, your children,
Hmm.
your husband, whatever it is, friends, healthy boundaries are a form of protection. And so that everybody in the relationship is mentally, emotionally, and spiritually stable. And so it's not just to protect you, but it's also to protect the other person in the relationship.
Hmm.
And Islamically, we see this very often. Like we see this in terms of the creation of balance, right?
Hmm.
Where the Prophet Muhammad SAW, when he saw someone going to an unbalanced extent in terms of their own worship, right? Like they're going too far.
Right.
The
Right.
Prophet ﷺ said, your own self has a right upon you.
Right. Right.
So our own self has a right upon us. And so boundaries help us to satisfy the rights of ourselves, also particularly number one, Allah, and the people that are closest to us.
Hmm.
It's that way. So if you're burnt out, you're constantly giving into the demands of others, you can't be at your best in your relationship with your family, yourself, or
Hmm.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the issue is that we're afraid to set boundaries because we're afraid it's going to damage the relationship.
Right.
But in
Because that's
reality,
what we've learned.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. But not setting boundaries actually damages the relationship because what's happening to, like, a woman who's listening to this, what's happening to you, to you right now
Right.
is resentment is building.
Yep. Yeah.
Resentment is building because you're giving, you're giving, you're giving, and people are expecting you to keep giving. But how are they supposed to know that the toll is happening? How are they supposed to
Hmm.
know that you're suffering when you're doing it in silence? Right? Like they
Okay.
can't fully know that, but then the resentment starts to build in you because
Right.
it's like, okay, so either I'm going to set some boundaries in a kind, respectful way, or I'm going to deal with the negative consequences of the relationship deteriorating because this resentment is building up within.
Hmm. Okay. So just to pause you there for 1 second, can you give an example of setting, like, so what does a boundary look like? What does setting a boundary in a healthy way look like?
So
Done respectfully.
let's say you have a relationship with your parents and you're an adult, they're adults, but they're still having this like aggressive reaction to you. Like
Hmm.
they're still yelling at you and everything. You're not going to go to them in that example and say, "I'm not going to allow you to yell at me."
Right.
That's not going to work, right? But instead, going and saying like,
What can you, why wouldn't it work? I'm being a devil's advocate
no,
for a
no.
reason. Yeah.
It's,
Like, why
so
would that
okay.
not work?
It depends on your goal. It would work in terms of like like it's not going to like you're going to maybe leave the room, but you have to do something. So it's like I'm not going to allow you to yell at me. So if you do, I'm done. I'm leaving,
Right.
right? It works in that you're not going to get yelled at that moment, right? So you achieve that goal, but is that your goal? Or is your goal that I want to have the best relationship I can with my parents and I don't want to get yelled at, right?
Right. Right.
And so it depends. So if your goal is I want to maintain this relationship. I want it to be as healthy as possible. And I also don't want to deal with this kind of dynamic between us.
Right.
Then you have to reassess how you're going to set the boundary. So it depends on what
Right.
your goal is.
I was gonna say part of it is also in my mind what I thought of as why it wouldn't work is can you stop someone from yelling? Like
Yeah.
you can't. Like they have to choose to not yell, right? Like you can't do anything about that in terms of getting them to stop. You can decide how you handle it, but like right? And so yeah, so I think reframing that boundary helps people see boundaries are about you and your what your choice you're making in that situation.
Exactly. So when you're setting a boundary, it has to be about what you are going to do, not
Right.
what the other person's going to do. You can't allow or disallow something from another
Right.
person. They have
Exactly.
their own free will. You cannot control what they do and how they react. You
Right.
can't. So boundaries are about how am I going to take control of the situation in terms of what is in my control? What am I going to
Hmm.
do? How am I going to respond? That's what the boundary is. And that's where people get confused. But then also respectfully setting a boundary would look something like, and this is best done when they're not yelling, right? So this is best done
Right.
preemptively.
Right.
So
Right.
having a conversation, and I want to be clear that as I like share this is not in abusive relationships, but and as I share this, it could not go over well, right? Like this
Yeah.
is going to
I was
feel
gonna
this,
ask you about that too, but yeah.
yeah, and this is going to feel very unnatural, very
Mhm.
unnatural, but it is what it is, right? Because like so let me give you the example. So if you go and when your parent is calm, having a good day, whatever, you go and you sit with them and you say, I noticed in our relationship, there's been like I noticed there's been a lot more, like you've been angry with me a lot and everything. And I don't want that to be our relationship. I
Mhm.
want it to be different. So the next time, if you get angry, what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna just like, I'm gonna say, like, hey, I know you're angry. So let's talk about this a little bit later. And then I'm gonna step out of the room. I'm
Mhm.
doing that because I want to show you respect. But I also know that this is not the kind of dynamic and relationship that we want. And depending on your relationship with the parent, depending on their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can also mention, I also don't want this to be on your scale on the day
Right.
of judgment.
Right.
I don't like, I want to protect you from that. So I'm going to step away. And then when we're calm, we can talk about it. Right. That's a beautiful way. That's an ideal way. It might not feel natural, but kind of like using something from that angle. What's different about this is that you're saying, I will do this, but you're also sharing an intention of good. You're
Mhm.
sharing that it comes from a place of love and care. That's where a respectful boundary comes from,
Right.
right? And when you think about that, like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that he told his companions, "Should I tell you something that's better than like optional charity, fasting,
Mhm.
and prayer?" And they said, "Yeah, we'd love to know that." And he said, "Putting things right between others." So when you go in, set a clear intention for yourself that I am trying to put things right between me and my parents, me and my friend, I'm trying to preserve our relationship. I'm trying to maintain these bonds. And when you go in with that intention and you can verbalize that intention to the person, it sets the tone for setting that boundary in the discussion. And the boundary doesn't become about like a wall between us. No, this boundary becomes about how can we get closer? And
Right.
that really is a big difference.
It's kind of putting guardrails in when things might kind of go off track. And
Yes.
so it's saying our ultimate goal for this train is fixing things between us. And here are the guardrails that we kind of have to operate in to make that work. Otherwise, we got to, whatever the action you've identified is, right? Otherwise, that has to
Yeah.
take into effect. So, which is like walking away or whatever you come up with. So, you've kind of given the ideal example, right? Like this is ideally how you would say it. I know you mentioned abusive, but not. I don't even just mean sort of as severe as abusive relationships, but there is a struggle when you are in a situation of trying to set boundaries when someone is not receptive or when you've been doing it and it's not received well at all, right? And there's an element of, power or a lot of times you mentioned this before too that like women who are in these positions of we don't know how to ask for help or we don't know how are other people supposed to know what we need, and some of that is because we've expressed our need and it's been rejected or shunned or we felt ashamed for it, or we've set boundaries and true boundaries and they weren't received well. So like sort of in that dynamic, what do boundaries look like and what advice would you have?
So there's two things I want to mention here. The first is about the guilt that comes up
Exactly.
of setting that boundary. And I heard something recently that I thought was a very good way to think about this, where guilt is the feeling that you get when you don't act in a way that aligns with your values, right?
Mm,
So that's where guilt is like a positive thing. Like the healthy guilt
right.
is a signal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us so that if you use foul language, you miss a prayer, you say something cruel to someone, and you're like, that does not align with who I view myself to be. That does not align with my values. I feel guilty.
Mhm.
That's healthy. That leads to repentance, right? And so that's a healthy thing.
Right.
So guilt is helpful to bring in this discrepancy, to bring it to our awareness and reflect on what we did, why we did it. Okay. When we set a boundary and we feel guilty, that is not actually guilt because we are acting in alignment with our values. It's like for me to have a healthy relationship with this person, I need to change something here. That's something
Mm,
that I value. I value this relationship. I also value my own mental health, emotional health. I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded me to take care of myself. I value these things, right? I also value that I can't be the worshiper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I want to be when my parent yells at me because I start yelling back,
right.
right? And so that's not right either. So, in order to align with my values, I need to set this boundary. So,
Hmm.
what I'm feeling when this comes up is not guilt. We're taking the other person's distress, their discomfort, their lack of
Mm,
tolerance of the change in dynamic, because whenever you change
internalizing
into
it.
dynamic, there's
Mm,
always going to be a problem. There's always going to be discomfort. Nobody likes change.
right.
And so I'm taking their distress and I'm feeling those feelings. And so
Mm,
I'm taking this person's feelings and I'm feeling those feelings myself.
right.
Okay. And
Okay.
that's where you go back to what was my intention? How am I'm doing this for the sake of Allah, and this is where it helps to alleviate some of that people pleasing.
Hmm.
Is Allah pleased with me in what I'm choosing to do here? In how I'm dealing with this situation when I face Allah on the day of judgment and I see this in my book of deeds, will I will I be happy about it?
Right.
If the answer to that is yes, you're good.
Okay.
You're good. If the answer to that is no, then re-examine.
Okay. The boundary itself is not crossing like Islamic bounds.
Yes.
Check, check, check. Then really, this is me taking on the other person's distress versus my actual. Okay.
Yeah, you put that so well, mashallah.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
tried. I hope I
I think
captured it.
we should write that down. That's a very
Yeah.
good checklist.
Action item for actor. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking about the guilt part, and I feel like that is the central issue for so many women. If we shift into sort of solutions and what advice we would have for women going through it, it's like I think coping with the guilt is like one of the biggest things of trying to figure that out.
Yeah. And high
Yeah.
achieving, one of the fears that high achievers have is this fear of people not being pleased with you, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
people being upset and that guilt that you feel. So to face that feeling is very, very uncomfortable.
Especially if that's what you've been raised as and attached value to that, then
Yes.
that's definitely very, very difficult. Yeah. Since we've been talking about Islam, I just want to make one thing clear before we kind of jump into sort of the final portion of like, now that we know what this looks like, what do we do about it? Can you just spend a few minutes just talking about what is this doing to women though?
So, high functioning anxiety, it involves living your life in a constant state of urgency,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you look like you're functioning well, but in reality, you're functioning urgently.
Mm-hmm.
And your nervous system is in overdrive. At some point, if you keep a car going at 120 miles per hour with like, and you're not stopping for gas, you're not stopping to rest, you're not stopping for any of this, that car's going to give up.
Right.
And so we are human beings. We have limited capacities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with limited capacities. He created the night for rest for a reason, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's, I think one of the things that comes from this too is there is the physical toll like you talked about. There is the mental toll of like a mental and emotional burnout, but I think that one of the things that is very striking is the relational toll
Mm-hmm.
that it impacts it. Like why do you, a lot of times, like women will do everything for everyone because they care, like they
Right.
care so deeply, but in the end it actually is going to result in those relationships being hurt too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and the reason why I'm choosing to showcase this is because sometimes this is the only thing that works, right? Like
Right.
we said, like this idea of doing things for everybody. Okay, sometimes you need to realize that you trying to do things for everybody actually doesn't serve everybody. It
Right.
definitely doesn't serve you, but you know that already. And that's not enough to make the change. But maybe if you realize that it doesn't serve them, then that change will actually be able to happen, right? And so a lot of times when you're in overdrive and you're overthinking, you are also under feeling, which can cause
Mm.
attachment in relationships. So in marriage,
No.
yeah, if you're juggling everything, it breeds this resentment and a sense of distance. In parenting, you're so holding yourself to like these impossible standards so that every setback is causing you to criticize yourself as a mother, and it's leading to like harshness with the kids, and it's
Right.
leading you down the path you don't want to be on. And then with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala too, that
Right.
this becomes like, once this becomes an identity, we lose sight of our true identity. And
Mm-hmm.
so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never asks us to do everything perfectly. He never asks us to do everything for everyone. He asks us to worship him. And once that becomes the center, it helps us to breathe and slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you have a center point. Instead of thinking, oh, I have to do this for this person, I have to put on this hat, I have to do this, and
Right.
you're everywhere all at once, it allows you to center yourself to what is the most important relationship in my life? What is the most important part of my identity? At the core, it's that I am a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Mm-hmm.
The trap of shaitan is that he wants you to believe that if you don't do everything for everyone, everything is going to fall apart.
Right.
But who is the ultimate caretaker
Mm-hmm.
of all of us, right? So then when this happens, worshiping Allah feels like another thing on an endless to-do list.
Right.
And it, instead of it being something that rejuvenates you, centers you, right? And something that eases the load, instead it feels like it's adding to the load. And so
Right.
that's one of the biggest costs, I
Right.
think.
I know it sounds like a really silly question to ask, but I feel like we just get so much pressure that I was like, we got to set the record straight. I've been wanting someone to say it out loud. Like, someone needs to clarify this who has the background. Going to bed exhausted, where you're barely focusing on your Isha Salat before you go to bed because you're so tired from everything else in the day, is not how it's supposed to be. That's not, something for us to champion and be like, yeah, I'm such an amazing person. I'm going to bed having done all of this, but what was the quality of my salah right before bed? How much did I think about Allah throughout the day as I'm running from these million different things that I'm doing? That's not something that we want to encourage or be proud of.
No.
So I just, yeah.
And it's interesting. Actually, right before I logged in here to have this conversation with you, I had listened to this clip by Dr. Marwa Asad, I think is her last name,
Hmm.
and she was talking about the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Do not be like those who forgot Allah until He made them forget themselves." And the way
Mm,
she analyzed it was beautiful. If anybody has a chance to go on her Instagram and listen to it, she did it. I won't do justice to how she phrased it, but it's basically this idea that at the core, our identity is based on us knowing Allah.
okay. So one of the biggest suggestions or strategies is reframing where your value comes from and what weight certain relationships have to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And all of us are at different places, right, in terms of our spirituality, and we recognize that. So if you're good at it, alhamdulillah. If you're not, then it's something to think about, is if you can shift your frame of reference from others to Allah, then that gives you a guidebook to also, like, when you're setting boundaries, right? Okay,
Yes.
how do I set these boundaries? Am I violating any boundaries? Oh, let me think about Allah and what that looks like. It also, like, so many of part of setting boundaries is being able to say no, right? Like, not taking on the extra drop off for another kid, or the extra job, task at work, or the extra meal drop off. I don't know, right? Like,
Yeah.
being able to say no to those things, if you can always take it back to that checklist you have with Allah, then that can help you with that. And so it's just one of the biggest things is to reframe it back to that relationship with Allah, and that being your guidepost for
Yeah.
all these things that you need to be able to do to kind of reclaim your agency and centering yourself, and your health as well.
Yeah, and seeing absolutely. I think you phrased it so beautifully. And seeing your worth, like, am I seeing this through an external validation lens, right? Where I'm needing that validation of doing this, I'm needing it from an external source, or can I need that just from Allah? And I think what you were saying about being able to say no,
Mhm,
there's a concept that like a few years back really changed my perspective on things, where
mhm,
I said, every yes is also a no, right? So if I
mhm,
say yes to something, that necessitates that I do have to say no to something else, right? Because you have limited time, you have limited energy.
mhm,
So if I say yes to picking up, an extra child on the way from school, what am I saying no to? Okay, maybe I'm saying no to some
mm,
alone time with my kids. Maybe I'm saying no to the extra 5 minutes that it were, or 10, 15 minutes that it would take me to drop off this child, that now causes us to rush to the next after school activity. So I'm saying no to, like, being relaxed with my kids on
mhm,
the way home from school. Okay, being able to analyze, is that no worth saying yes to, right?
mhm,
And sometimes that, yeah, it is still saying yes to that is worth it, because let's say that mother is going through, like, she had a newborn, or she's going through a health struggle, or something's happening in their family. Your inconvenience in that moment, it's worth saying yes so that you can be there for her. But on a typical day, maybe not, right?
right, right,
So every yes is also a no, and every no is also a yes. So if I say no to this, what does it allow me to say yes to? Right. So that, I think, also helps us to, like, kind of, prioritize and set some of those limits.
right. One last thing, we're not going to be able to dig into this. I know we don't have time, but we also need to start thinking as a society and as a community about what do others need to do to help women in this space too, right? Like, one of the
Yes.
questions I had was like, what do men need to do as leaders of our families and our communities? So we will have an episode on men's mental health, inshallah, so we'll talk about it there. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with people listening as we wrap up?
I think that would be a great topic, mashallah.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to listening to that podcast when it gets released, inshallah. No, in terms of, just like a final thought, it would be to have, like, as you're listening to this, and as you're reflecting on it, and as you're going on this, like, journey for yourself, and as you're trying to think of things as next steps of, like, what's the fear that's underneath, what am I avoiding, and how can I avoid the avoidance, right? Like, step
Mhm,
into a little bit more of that discomfort. Try and have that intent of getting back to that core of your
mhm,
identity, where it's like, this is a path of me caring for myself in a way that brings me back to Allah. And then every single step, every single struggle, every single trip up that you have, that's going to be something that you're rewarded for. So nothing feels worthless.
mhm.
It feels worthwhile. And I think that that's something that, for people who are high achievers, feeling like what you're doing is worthwhile is something that can be motivating.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So, yeah, I feel like I've learned so much just listening to you today, and I kind of want a part two because I have so many more questions. But we are at the end of our session. I think this has been a great conversation about, I think, the women that go unnoticed, right? And they are struggling silently but mightily. And so I hope that by digging into it a little bit, we've been able to really uncover what's happening, but also provide some tips to help us do some of that reframing that I think all of us need to do, inshallah.